There's always plenty of talk around the NFL about the best ever. Who's the best player ever, the best team ever, the best game ever. But today we're talking about the worst ever. The teams your memory wanted you to forget. The ones who achieved the wrong kind of immortality. In this video, we're going to focus on the worst teams in the Super Bowl era. There were winless teams throughout the 20th century, but many of those were in the early years of the NFL, where teams were constantly folding or later battled player shortages due to World War II. And instead of going in chronological order, I figured it'd be a bit more fun if I ranked them from the 10th worst team ever all the way down to number 1. The 1996 Jets deserve additional shame for having the highest payroll in the league. By mid-season, they were called the worst team money can buy. Newly signed quarterback Neil O'Donnell had terrible luck, suffering a shoulder injury that caused him to miss 6 games. Then in pre-game warm-ups, his first game back, he tore a calf muscle after slipping on the paint of the Jets logo. Head coach Rich Kotite was known to work limited hours. In fact, he kept 2 cars at the facility. He'd park one in the front and one in the back. That way he could sneak out and people would still think he was in his office working the night away. All in all, this team managed a single win. Amazingly, the Jets made it to the AFC Championship just 2 years later with Bill Parcells leading the way. The 1980 New Orleans Aints. This is the year where that nickname became famous. The fans were fed up to the point where they started wearing bags over their heads. The worst game of the season came after leading the Niners 35-7 and still finding a way to choke it all away. That game sorta sums up their season. Archie Manning and the offense could put up some points, but their league worst defense would find a way to screw things up. In the end, their only win of the season was a 1-point victory over the 4-12 Jets. Archie summed it up best, calling the season the darkest side of football. Before the season began for the 1971 Bills, head coach John Roush resigned, and that was just the beginning of this dreadful year. The Bills lost their first 10 games of the season and finished with a 1-13 record. In one game against the Colts, Buffalo put together one of the worst offensive performances in history, tallying 4 first downs while turning the ball over 6 different times. Running back O.J. Simpson had 7 carries for -10 yards. And in total, the Bills had more penalty yards than total yards on offense. That year, quarterback Dennis Shaw, fresh off a Rookie of the Year award in 1970, he threw for a league-leading 26 interceptions while tossing 11 touchdowns. Next, we have the 1973 Oilers. This was Houston's second year in a row with a record of 1-13. Quarterback Dan Pastorini was tough as nails, but got pummeled throughout his time with the Oilers, and this year was no different. Combine that with one of the worst defenses ever, and you have their point differential that year, which was the worst in the league by 50 points. Second-year head coach Bill Peterson was fired after just 5 games. If you're wondering how a team could fire a coach that fast, then might I recommend watching one of his locker room speeches.
Here's our game plan. We're going out there this first half, and we're going to explode like a bomb. Then the second, we're just going to get higher. Third quarter, we're going to get higher. And the fourth quarter, we're just going to catch on fire, and that's our game plan. And let's just go out and do it that way.
Peterson, with an overall record of 1-18, has the lowest winning percentage out of any coach post-merger who coached at least one season. In his defense, though, the team went 1-8 the rest of the way in 1973. At number 6, we have the 2009 Rams. These guys might be overshadowed by the 0-16 Lions the year before, but the Rams actually somehow managed to have a worse point differential at -261. They also played an easier schedule than those '08 Lions, but they did manage to get one win, and that was against the Lions, of course. They also took the Jaguars to overtime, so although some have argued this team was worse than the winless Lions, in the end, a win is a win. So 1-15 plus an overtime loss can get you out of our top 5 worst teams of all time. Running back Steven Jackson was the bright spot for this team, and they certainly needed that because their most productive quarterback that year was Mark Bulger, who threw for just 5 touchdown passes. Next up, we have the 1990 Patriots. This team started the season 1-1, but the day after their first win changed everything. 3 players were accused of sexually harassing a reporter, and to make things worse, team owner Victor Kayam made a joke out of it. The players and team were fined by the NFL and later sued by the reporter. It was no doubt the darkest period in the team's history. On the field, things weren't any better. Their negative 265 point differential remained the league's worst of the decade. In one game, they were down 9-0 before their opponent even ran an offensive play. And in their only win, they won by just 2 points. This team was inept on both sides of the ball, but the offense really found new ways to embarrass itself every single week. That year, the Boston Globe wrote, "If something bad in the game of football can happen, it will not only happen to the Patriots, but it will happen in a new and different way." So yes, out of all the bad Patriots teams of the 20th century, this one sticks out as the worst. We're kind of cheating here, but I didn't want this list to be filled with multiple Colts teams, so we decided to combine them all into number 4. Starting with the 1981 Colts, they hold the record for most points allowed in a season, despite playing under rules that favored the defense more than today's game. The 533 points allowed comes out to 33.3 points per game, which for the early 80s is unheard of. They finished 2-14, but their only wins came against the 2-14 Patriots by a combined 3 points. In one particular blowout that year, owner Bob Irsay decided to start calling plays himself. Quarterback Burt Jones said, "Irsay couldn't have told you how many players there were on the field, never mind what plays we had. All he was trying to do was embarrass the coaches and the players." The next year, in a strike-shortened season, the Colts went 0-8-1. That year, head coach Frank Kush called the team a disgrace to football. And finally, we have the 1991 Colts, who went 1-15 with one of the worst offenses of all time. On 11 different occasions, this team failed to hit 10 points in a game. Head coach Ron Meyer was fired after just 5 games, but the team didn't get any better after that. In their only win, they won by 1 single point. Because this team was hit so hard with injuries, quarterback Jeff George said there were faces in the huddle where he didn't even know their names. Still, with no excuses, running back Eric Dickerson said, "Personally, I wouldn't come out and watch a game. No way I'd pay to see someone play the way we are." Before the season began for the 2017 Browns, rookie quarterback DeShone Kizer said he had the mind of Tom Brady and the body of Cam Newton. That year, he went on to throw a league-leading 22 interceptions. In Kizer's defense, he was put into the worst situation in the league. The year prior, the Browns had gone 1-15. In 2017, they had the most turnovers committed and the least turnovers forced. Their average margin of defeat was 11.4 points. If these Browns had an argument for being the worst team ever, then the foundation for it might come from their final game, where they lost to a Steelers team that benched their best players. But overall, Cleveland was in plenty of close games. They just happened to go 0-6 in games decided by 1 score. Head coach Hugh Jackson somehow kept his job after going 0-16, and he delivered one of the best quotes in NFL history, saying after the season, "I don't think anybody else could have done this job." To celebrate the winless season, Browns fans held a parade in the shape of a zero. Although the 2008 Lions aren't our worst ranked team ever, they should probably own the title for most embarrassing team ever. After all, they had the benefit of modern NFL parity rules with free agency and a salary cap, and they weren't an expansion team like the number 1 team on our list. Plus, they were playing a 16-game schedule in which they lost every game. Before the season even began, Detroit's top draft pick was sentenced to 1-year probation for his role in a bar fight, and their second pick had been charged with a DUI 6 days before the draft. Ironically, the team went undefeated in the preseason before dropping every real game. In the 6th game of the season, Dan Orlovsky had his famous safety run out of the end zone, a picture that perfectly encapsulates this season. After the first 10 games, a flustered Rod Marinelli said to a reporter, "I'm not 0-10. You're 0-10. And after the 14th loss, center Dominic Raiola flipped off some heckling fans. That same week, a reporter asked Marinelli about defensive coordinator Joe Barry, who was also his son-in-law. The reporter said, "Do you wish your daughter would have married a better defensive coordinator?" It was a sick burn, but did cost the reporter his job. Speaking of losing jobs, just about everyone was fired from the Lions after that year, and 12 of the 45 players who started a game for the team never played another NFL snap. All in all, the team gave up over 32 points per game. They had a messy quarterback situation. Calvin Johnson still somehow tied for the league lead in touchdowns. Maybe the one good thing this team had going for it. The 1976 Bucks' negative 287-point differential is the worst in the Super Bowl era. In their first game, they got lost in the Houston Astrodome and barely made it for opening kickoff. The offense was so bad that year that the defense more or less had to play 2 seasons in one. They were shut out 5 different times in 14 games. They were outscored by an average of over 20 points per game. Not once did they themselves score more than 20 points. They averaged a putrid 8.9 points per game. At one point, Coach John McKay was asked about his team's execution, and he replied, "I'm in favor of it." So why was this team so bad? For one, they were forced to build a team with harsher expansion draft rules. Many of the players in the draft had injury problems, and teams were happy to let them go. And secondly, the Bucks overpracticed. The amount of two-a-days they ran, well, it ran them into the ground. Defensive end Pat Toomey said their sidelines looked like a Civil War infirmary. He also described his journey from the Cowboys to the Bucks as football's penthouse to the outhouse. This team just couldn't get anything right. At one point, after a blowout loss to the Broncos, the bus left the team's owner in Denver's parking lot. After the season, Coach McKay said to the players, "Stop by my office tomorrow and pick up some fake noses and mustaches so no one recognizes your sorry asses." This excruciating start for the franchise continued into the next year as the Bucks lost 26 games in a row before their first franchise win. Of course, it was such an embarrassment for the Saints to be the team to lose to them. The Bucks' next win came against the Cardinals, who also fired their coach. After those 2 wins in 1977, Coach McKay famously told the press, 3 or 4 plane crashes and we're in the playoffs. This Bucks team was so bad it probably changed other sports too. No league wanted to have an expansion franchise like this. It's obviously a terrible way to gain new fans. The NFL changed the rules for expansion drafts, and we've seen other leagues put measures into place to keep expansion teams more competitive. There may be other winless teams in league history, but the expansion Bucks are the worst among them.
The real worst team was the 2007 Patriots because they lost to Eli.